Okay, no problem. I'm in communication with Dr. Cabalza, so he will definitely be in the Zoom in a while. So let's start, even if he's not in the Zoom yet, but he will get into the Zoom already in a few minutes. He's just having some technical problems. But anyway, is it okay if we're gonna proceed? So that will not be constrained by time, no? Raven, is it okay? Let's ask our, okay. Sir Sixto said, yes, let's proceed. And let's just have Dr. Cabalza in a while. Definitely he will be inside the Zoom. Okay, let's proceed. Okay, wait. Okay. So ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Apcu members and trustees, to our distinguished resource speakers, to our media friends, to our local and foreign friends and colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Apcu Forum with the theme Independent Foreign Policy and the Philippines Pivot to China, Gains and Challenges.
There's no sounds.
Wait.
Okay.
Okay, sorry. My name is Ana Malindog Uy, and I am the moderator of this forum. As many
Good afternoon,
of us,
everybody. Let's put ourselves in the presence of the Holy God.
Miss Mappy, not yet, Miss
Heavenly
Mappy.
Father, creator of heaven and earth, we glorify your name for you are good and loving.
Wait, Miss Mappy, not yet, no? Okay, let me repeat, no? I'm Ana Malindog Uy, and I am the moderator of this forum. As many of us know, the Philippines and China established formal diplomatic relation on June 9, 1975. However, the ties that bind the two countries are no doubt much deeper than 46 years. These historical links reflect not only our profound friendship, but a deeper kinship. The Philippines and China are natural friends brought about by the circumstances of our geography and common historical experiences. Currently, the bilateral relation of the Philippines and China remains focused on friendship and positive cooperation, whether bilaterally or within the ASEAN framework. On this note, from our forum today, will focus on explore the gains and challenges of the Philippines' so-called pivot to China and the current administration independent foreign policy. The forum will also, to a greater extent, explore perspectives and prescription on how the next administration will craft its foreign policy, and if in any case the independent foreign policy of the current administration is worth pursuing. That being said, without further ado, let us start the program of our Apcu Forum today. To start with, may I call on the chairman of the Youth Committee of Apcu Director, Ms. Maffy Hongchai, for the invocation. Ms. Maffy? Ms. Maffy?
Oh, good afternoon, everyone. Sorry, I'm having a technical glitch with my laptop. Actually, I cannot hear you. So I was advised that it's my turn now. So let's put ourselves in the holy presence of the Lord. Heavenly Father, creator of heaven and earth, we glorify your name for you are good and loving. You have given us magnificent creations we enjoy daily. We praise and thank you for all the blessings you have given us. We thank you for another opportunity today to gather so we could grow in wisdom and understanding. May we be more enlightened about the benefits and challenges of foreign policy and the Philippine situation. Help us value each other's opinions and lead us to inspiring discussions. May this event be a success and be able to touch every person's heart and mind. And at the end of the day, may all of us accomplish something meaningful. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Thank you, Ms. Maffy. The next part of our program is the opening remarks to be delivered by Apcu Vice Chairman, Mr. Sixto Benedicto. Sir Noy, you have the floor po.
Thank you, Professor Anna. Fellow trustees, officials, and members of the Association for Philippines-China Understanding, to our distinguished resource speaker, media partners, friends, and colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, a pleasant afternoon. First of all, I would like to extend our warmest welcome to all participants in our forum today. We have two esteemed speakers with respectable credentials who will walk us through a vital topic in our greater understanding of China-Philippine relations. China and the Philippines are close neighbors across the sea, sharing time-honored bonds of friendship and kinship. Philippines-China bilateral relations have not only improved under President Rodrigo Duterte's administration, but have been upgraded to comprehensive strategic cooperation. Indeed, the ties between the two countries have improved dramatically despite differences, as exemplified by the 8 times face-to-face meetings between President Duterte and President Xi Jinping, which boosted a deepening friendship and mutual understanding between the two countries. Despite the COVID-19 pandemic, the two leaders are often in touch with each other through cloud diplomacy, via phone calls and the exchanging of letters and messages. Both leaders attach great importance to the two countries' bilateral relations, the Philippines and China. Under the Duterte administration, relations have blossomed and gained newfound vigor for almost 6 years. Likewise, Filipinos have appreciated and recognized the importance of having friendly relations with China. They have come to appreciate the tangible benefits and gains that this friendship brings to the country. No doubt, since President Rodrigo Duterte's historic pivot to China in 2016 and the pursuit of independent foreign policy, Philippine-China relations have never been better. In fact, it is undeniable that bilateral relations have taken a greater significance, nurtured by our shared vision of the future. On this note, today, our two esteemed speakers will share their respective perspectives on where this relationship is headed and will walk us through the gains and challenges of the Philippine pivot to China and the current administration's independent foreign policy. This and more will be explored today by our esteemed speakers. Ladies and gentlemen, let us welcome our distinguished resource speakers. Professor Bobby Tuazon is the Director of Policy Studies, Center for People Empowerment and Governance, and former Chairman Political Science Program of the University of the Philippines, Manila. And Dr. Chester Cabalza, President and Founder of International Development and Security Cooperation. Thank you. Welcome.
Thank you, Sir Noy, for that opening remarks. Before we introduce our first resource speaker, let me just quickly mention our forum's guideline. These guidelines will ensure the efficient conduct of our forum. First is all participants will be muted except for the speakers and the moderator. Participants may type their questions and comments via the Zoom chat box. And those interested to have copies of the resource speaker's presentation, kindly signify your interest via the Zoom chat box and provide the Apcu Secretariat with your name and an email address. Apcu will provide and send the presentation materials of the resource speakers after the forum. Friends and colleagues, thank you for your attention. Moving forward, let me introduce our first resource speaker. Our first resource speaker is the Director for Policy Studies at the Center for People Empowerment in Governance, or CenPEG. As a professor, he formerly served as the former head of the Political Science Committee at the University of the Philippines, Manila. Ladies and gentlemen, let us welcome Professor Bobby Tuazon for his presentation. Professor Bobby, you have the floor po.
Yes, thank you very much, Professor Anna. And thank you also to the officers and members of the Association of Philippine-China Understanding, which I remember was founded probably 50 years ago. So without further ado, I I would like to proceed with my short presentation. May I have the access to share screen?
Raven, please assist.
You can share po since you're a co-host. Kindly try. Thank you.
Okay, yes, so this is my short presentation. I titled my short presentation as Aligning Philippine Foreign Policy with the Emerging Multipolar System. So that's my title. I think I only have some six to eight slides here. Now, as most of us know, the Philippines' independent foreign policy, or the pursuit of an independent foreign policy, was begun in 1946 and continues up to the present. But my main point here is that the pursuit of an independent foreign policy remains as elusive as ever. It remains as elusive as ever. That is from my own perspective. In the first place, Philippine-U.S. relations was defined by onerous treaties and agreements with the United States. Or Philippine foreign policy was almost centered on Philippine-U.S. relations. But these relations were defined by onerous treaties and agreements with the U.S. Among them, of course, the 1947 Military Bases Agreement. Then we have the 1951 Mutual Defense Pact or Mutual Defense Treaty. There was this Manila Pact that established the Southeast Asian Treaty Organization. And then through the following years, there's this Visiting Force Agreement signed with the U.S. in 1998 and ratified in 1999 by the Philippine Senate. And other succeeding administrations came up with their own agreements with the U.S., the latest of which is the EDCA, or the Extended Defense Cooperation Agreement with the United States, that was signed way back in 2015, witnessed by visiting American President Barack Obama. Now, number two, it has been the dominant governing elite who have subscribed to strong but dependent relationship with the U.S. I refer, of course, to the members of Congress, the president, vice president, and other policymakers who reach a common ground to maintain a strong but dependent relationship with the U.S. Dependent because those agreements were in the first place onerous in the context of the Philippines being weak and unable to provide for its own military capability, and also economically weak. So we were at that point where we had no way to go to pursue a truly independent foreign policy except to depend on the support, military assistance, and even diplomatic support of the United States. Now, one other reason why we have been unable to maintain an independent foreign policy is because we are hamstrung or limited by our weak economy and weak institutions. The weak institutions, for instance, would be represented by the weak congressional oversight of the on the Philippine foreign policy. There was during the time of Senator Miriam Defensor Santiago a call for review or revisiting the various agreements with the U.S., but that was never pursued and was of course preempted by the fact that she passed away in 2016, and nobody else, no other member of the Philippine Senate was able to take up, the vision that was begun by the late Senator Santiago. Now, another perennial problem is that our Philippine foreign policy lacks strategic vision. It changes at every term of the presidency, resulting in uncertainties and unpredictabilities. This is not my own conclusion or observation, but I echo the sentiments of some insiders within the DFA during a certain period, complaining about the fact that they were quite confused or were worried about the lack of coherence in the country's Philippine foreign policy. So those are the problems now that beset our foreign policy in its quest for an independent one. Now, how about Mr. Duterte's pivot to China from 2016 to present? What are the gains and challenges? President Duterte, with his counterpart, President Xi Jinping of China, agreed on a comprehensive strategic partnership. But the way I look at it, this partnership was used by the Duterte government as some kind of a balancing act in the face of challenges coming from the U.S. Accusing his new government of human rights violations, as well as the EU, European Union, and also at the time when the government sought to fast forward or to fast track economic development, the Duterte government saw in China as a friendly, cooperative partner in fast tracking the country's Philippine development. However, to be concrete, out of 17 memorandum of understanding based infra projects signed since 2016 or signed in 2016, only 3 are completed. Only 3. I think 2 of these are the bridges that had been completed last year and were subsequently open to vehicles. Now, China, of course, has become the country's largest trading partner, but there is trade imbalance in favor of Beijing. And this has been a concern that has been aired for several times, for several occasions. But one I can understand, of course, that compared to China, the Philippine economy was still crawling and unable to be competitive. Most of the products or the commodities that we export to Beijing are raw materials, fruits like banana and other commodities. So this is something that the next administration should probably look into. How do we make our trade with China quite even? Of course, there is always a trade imbalance, but not to the level of the wide disparity of trade between the 2 countries. So the next government should look into this. So after 76 years, what is now the state, or what has become of the state of the country's the state of the country's independent foreign policy? One is that the country clearly still maintains a strong defense alliance with the US, and this is being deepened under the administration of US President Joe Biden, who promised to widen, expand, and broaden its defense alliance with also in Asia Pacific, and this has been highlighted by the new strategic goal of the US with regard to the Indo-Pacific strategy against China. So very clearly, the DFA or the Philippine government has a problem on that. How will it maintain its development partnership with China by also balancing the US? But how do you balance the US when you are, locked in in a very tight defense partnership or defense cooperation with the US? So by and large, it is really hard to believe that we have an independent foreign policy until now. Now I decided to extend or to expand my presentation to make it more relevant to the current global situation. And the question that I would like to pose here, how do you strategizing Philippine foreign policy under the emerging multipolar system? Many thinkers, scholars, academics, and other analysts agree that the world is shifting from a unipolar system dominated by the US to a multipolar system where no country, no major power is able to dominate or to maintain global hegemony. Now, there are 5 points here that I would like to discuss very briefly to explain this thesis or this proposal. There's now a new Eurasian center of power led by Russia and China, where both countries have also converging interests, and that a few months ago, 1 month ago, both countries agreed that their partnership has no limits. Others call it, there's no formal alliance, there's no formal military alliance, but many agree that China and Russia are more than allies. They are more than allies. Now, what do we mean by Eurasian Center? Well, if you believe or if you agree on the geopolitics perspective and reference its beginnings in the theory of Mackinder in the late 19th century, where he said that who controls Eurasia controls Europe or controls the whole region, and whoever controls the whole region controls the world. The point, however, here is that I am not absolutely concluding that both Russia and China have a common objective to rule the world. I'm only saying here that they have now the capability to at the minimum, influence global politics. Now, where will that lead to in terms of possible military conflicts and so on and so forth? That can be discussed later. Now, secondly, there is a transcontinental economic group called the BRICS, or Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. In addition, there's also the Shanghai Cooperation Agreement, or Organization rather, SCO, which is a transcontinental political, economic, and security alliance. It is the world's largest regional organization now, covering 60% of Eurasia, 40% of the world population, and more than 30% of the global GDP, including the 8 regular members of the SCO. There are 20 more other members here, including the members of the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, or ASEAN. Then, of course, the ambitious Belt and Road Initiative, initiated way back in 2013 under the leadership of Chinese President Xi Jinping, which envisions to enhance connectivity throughout the world in terms of infrastructures, highways, expressways, railways, and other modern infrastructures, and is funded by the AIIB, or the Asian Investment Bank, investment in AIIB Bank. No? Now, this third one has become a new emerging topic of discussion today in the light of the Ukraine war, or Ukraine war, where Russia launched what it calls special military operations on Ukraine on account of the eastward expansion by the North Atlantic Treaty Organization that encircles Russia, and was begun in 1991, despite the end of the Cold War then. Now, in the light of the harsh economic sanctions imposed on Russia, as well as Belarus, and new economic sanctions that were to be imposed on China by the US, in the light of China's refusal to cooperate with Biden to support their economic sanctions. So both countries now are talking about this and how they will be able to strengthen cooperation at this level. So there are now new global financial and payment system that includes Russia's system for transfer of financial messages, or SPFS, and the National Payment Card System, or MIR, MIR. On the part of China, there's the cross-border interbank payment system, or CIPS, as well as its popular Union Pay. Now, some countries are already talking with Russia, like Saudi Arabia and India, to buy oil to be paid in euro and no longer in US dollars. And I think some countries are also in agreement with Russia that transactions can be paid in Russian ruble. Now, while those countries led by China and Russia are somewhat strengthening their cooperation and partnerships in the light of the sweeping changes in the world, The Ukraine war, on the other hand, has revealed deepening divisions between the US, between EU and among the EU countries, and also in the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. One particular example is the fact that Germany has refused to join economic sanctions initiated by the US on Russia with regard to the prohibition of oil exports. We know for a fact, of course, that Germany has two standing oil pipelines waiting to be opened that will make the delivery of oil or natural gas from Russia to Germany directly. The first pipeline, I think, crosses Ukraine, and Ukraine is reaping revenues from this because of the fees that have to be paid. In the light of the fact that they have allowed, of course, the pipeline has to cross the territory of Ukraine. Now, the last point is the weakening of the American empire. The weakening of the American empire, I call it comprehensive weakening of the American empire. And I think the only power that America has now is its military power. One indication of the weakening of the American empire is how Saudi Arabia and one other Arab country refused to receive the call of the White House, knowing that Biden was calling them to support sanctions on Russia. So they refused his call. And India also does not succumb to the same pressure by the US to support sanctions against Russia. And instead, India has decided to increase the amount of oil imports that it is getting from Russia. So you can see the shift and the weakening, the clear weakening of the American power or American influence, what they traditionally call the carrot and stick approach. Now, so in the light of these sweeping developments, these tectonic changes, are we ready to align our foreign policy accordingly? And how do we make foreign policy an instrument, a real instrument of our national interests? National interest, not necessarily the interest of business interest, but the interest of the whole nation, benefiting from a foreign policy that is independent, whose main purpose is to make it as a tool to promote, to defend, and enhance our own domestic interests. So this is a challenge, I suppose, that should be addressed likewise to the next administration come May 2022 elections. Now, finally, what then are the risks and challenges that the country should be aware of? There is now, technically speaking, Cold War II. Cold War II, with highlighted by increasing U.S. military budget of $800 billion this year and more in the coming years. Cold War is, of course, indicated by the continuing attacks of the U.S. on China, not only in the South China Sea, but also in over at the Taiwan Strait. Number two, the continuing threat coming from US, NATO against Russia, as a result of NATO's eastward expansion and encirclement of Russia. These are the characteristics, or these have been the characteristics of Cold War I, the first Cold War that transpired from 1946 until 1991. Now, in addition, there are about 200,000 US forces stationed abroad, with plus 750 military bases scattered on every continent, and continuing counter-terrorism operations, as they claim, in 85 countries, including, I suppose, in southern Philippines. There are, as we can see, there's no halt to wars and armed conflicts, and there will be more possible new wars or armed conflicts fueled by the military-industrial congressional complex. When the Ukraine war erupted, the profitability of the arms industries went up. The stocks of the MICC went up, like McDonnell Douglas, Raytheon, and other manufacturers engaged in the production of weapons of mass destruction. So in the light of these developments, the fear is that increased militarism, increased military spending, involvement, many countries involved in wars and armed conflicts will eclipse or undermine even the global cooperation on climate change. So that will be a big disappointment, and it will prove to be a setback on the global efforts toward mitigating climate change all over the world. That ends my short presentation. Thank you very much, Professor Anna.
Thank you. Wait, yes. Thank you, Professor Bobby Tuazon, for that thought-provoking presentation, sir. Moving forward, let me introduce our second resource speaker. Our second resource speaker is the founder and president of the Manila-based think tank, International Development and Security Cooperation, or IDSC, and teaches in the graduate school at the University of the Philippines, Diliman. He was also the vice president of the Center of Research and Strategic Studies and the executive fellow at the Development Academy of the Philippines. He also lectures for and advises theses of senior military officers at the National Defense College of the Philippines and the Command and General Staff College. He is also a fellow of the College of Defense Studies at National Defense University in Beijing and the U.S. State Department under the stewardship of the University of Delaware. He has published in peer-reviewed journals in the purview of security studies and recently co-authored the book titled The Rise of Philippinization. Philippinization is not Finlandization. And won the IFSSO International Prize for the Social Science Award. He is regularly interviewed by local and foreign media on the South China Sea, regional terrorism, and related international political economy issues. Friends and colleagues, let us welcome our second resource speaker, Dr. Chester Cabalza. Dr. Cabalza, you may proceed with your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Anna Malindog-Uy, for your kind introduction. You know, every time and then I usually attend some of your forums, and I'm just a watcher with your very important webinars and forums. And now, thank you for the privilege of inviting me as one of your speakers this afternoon. Truly an honor for me. Let me share my PowerPoint presentation so that later on I can start with discussion on this topic that was given to us on the independent foreign policy and the pivot to China and some gains and challenges. I know that we have differing opinions in some other matters, but of course, with the Association of Philippine-China Understanding, the goal here is for us to have better understanding and perhaps to guide the next administration on what to do, especially with our very important relations with China. We saw for the past 6 years that we have a robust bilateral relationship with China. And when we talk about this relationship, we have many dimensions to look at. And one of the very controversial dimensions in terms of our bilateral relationship would be the political and security strategic relationship that with Beijing. And now I want to discuss first, although let me go to the next slide. There are 3 questions that I really would want for us to guide us in our in my discussion this afternoon. It's a narrative that we wanted to learn from each other and to, as of course previously discussed by Professor there. Did the Philippines succeed in its attempt to gain independent foreign policy? Of course, he mentioned about the multipolar, in which case other Asian scholars like Amitav Acharya has called it the multiplex world, the combination of a multipolar and complex world. And I think this would be better encompass the kind of world that we are right in because of the complexity of the problems that we have. Multipolarity is a very Western concept, in which case multiplexity is an Asian perspective on how we see the world order right now. And will the Philippines become a game changer in the Indo-Pacific strategy after its pivot to China? And this is another controversial topic because we are talking about a Western American concept on Indo-Pacific, which other major powers like Russia and China are trying to contest and debate about the concept of this Indo-Pacific. Is it going to be helping us in a way for the Philippines? And we will see some of this discussion later on this topic. And what are the gains and challenges for the Philippines' closeness with China? Will it be sustained to balance a whole of alliance approach? And given that the whole of alliance approach comes also from a Western perspective, basically from American framework there, we'll see how this closeness of Manila and Beijing will help us in some of the bilateral relationship that the Philippines has posed for the past 6 years, and of course with the succeeding years for the next president. Okay, it was already discussed which I will also be discussing about the multipolarity and the multiplexity of the world order. But I'd like to begin with my narrative on this our understanding of the China's comprehensive national power. I remember when I studied in Beijing at the National Defense University, one of the key concepts that struck me as a student of military diplomacy at the Defense College there was China's concept of its CNP, the Comprehensive National Security. We know for a fact that the West have been teaching us about the hard power, soft, and the smart powers. And of course, we know for a fact that hard may be related to military and economic, and then soft power would be more on cultural, diplomatic, and then smart power would be the combination of both. But certainly, the comprehensive national power of China is a putative measurement, in which case they try to indigenize it in such a way that they are trying to help us understand the kind of measurement that China would want to have in its own invention of its general power to nation states. And this was used in 1980s and became very prominent in 1990s. And definitely because of the quantitative nature of that, China could not even reach that highest peak, becoming the top one in the CNP that they have. So meaning to say that China is really also trying its best to critique its own performance based from this CNP that they have, because it's very holistic. The military, political, economic, cultural factors of countries. And the comprehensiveness of this computation, they look at the diplomatic and engagements of nations. And they even defined this in 1995 as the totality of a country's economic, military, and political power in a given period. And it signals the country's comprehensive development level and its position in the international system. And we know for a fact that in 2010, China became the second largest economy. And of course, they have still ambitions and dreams, just like any sovereign nation on earth, to at least alleviate their people. And we know for a fact that since 1979, China has been very vivid in terms of their economic development, and they were able to alleviate Chinese people from poverty, and we've seen a lot of middle class Chinese now. And the China model of on economic development was even used, although it's a special case that of course cannot easily be replicated because of the form of government that we have, and also because of the the visions that they have, the leaders, Chinese leaders having their visions in terms of their development. And it was unimaginable for many nations on earth to see China achieve such economic success, becoming the second largest economy, and perhaps it could even become the #1 economy. And we have macroeconomic facts and projections in the future, but that by 2030 to 2050, China might even become the largest economy on earth, to be followed by India, and of course, the United States will be positioned as #3. And imagine Indonesia, as part of Southeast Asia, can even be the 4th largest economy in the world. So it's not a surprise if a Southeast Asian nation like the Philippines could even aspire. The projection for the Philippines is that we will become the 16th or 14th largest economy by 2050. So you see the spillover of this economic miracle coming from Asia, particularly with the leadership of China and India. And we will see that later on through the comprehensive national power of China on how they compute this power projection per country. And really, with the kind of narrative that we are hearing from China, there's a possibility that even a Southeast Asian country like Indonesia can benefit from that, including the Philippines, two of the largest archaeological countries in the world from Southeast Asia. So let's try to look at this one. It was already discussed to shift from unipolarity to bipolarity, and now you have multipolarity, in which case, of course, I would like to guarantee the notion that it's going to be a multiplex world. And of course, we know now that there's a competition of powers of it's like a nomination. We are now in the process of nominating which country will lead us basically in the future, because the US is being challenged right now, and there are many foreign policies by the United States that cannot even reach the potentials of other nations, and they're trying to contradict some of these American practices in the international community. And so we could see here the if in the 17th century we've seen the concert of Europe, as they say, because of the Vienna Convention, and we see that there are different great powers or major powers competing for their meant to become the superpower, in which case later on we saw the United Kingdom or the Great Britain becoming the superpower, and then it was transferred to the United States, and now we are seeing again that kind of concert, and the shift is coming from, of course, from Europe to Asia. If we've seen the concert of Europe in the past, perhaps now we are seeing the concert of Asia, because as mentioned earlier, we are seeing the shift, and most of the emerging markets in the past, at present, will become the biggest economies or markets in the future. And these countries come from Asia, basically. we are seeing China, India, Indonesia, and of course, Russia will be part in the top 10 of the top emerging economies in the world later on. So meaning to say that Asians now can compete economically, financially, and through trade. That's why recently during the Trump administration, we've seen the trade war. And we know for a fact that the Americans received flack in terms of their performance in the trade war. And China was able to recover from those challenges thrown to them by the United States. But the point that we're trying to drive at here, given the kind of the international system that we are embracing right now, which is a multipolar and a multiplex world, the Philippines should learn its lesson on how to construct its independent foreign policy, which we will try to critique later on if it really achieved an independent foreign policy. And I think that is the question that we are trying to understand in this forum. And of course, it was already discussed also earlier that we have not achieved what an independent foreign policy should be for our government. I think in Asia, you have Indonesia and India because of their long practice of non-alignment in terms of their foreign policy, where they were able to attain that such level of independent foreign policy. And we've seen the Bandung Conference in Indonesia during the time of Sukarno and Jawaharlal Nehru having this kind of elegance in terms of its non-alignment relations that help India cement its position for having an independent foreign policy. But for the case of the Philippines, since it was also stipulated in our constitution to have an independent foreign policy, but again, it was not properly implemented and addressed. There were verbose statements coming from our president, but it was really unclear on how it should be practiced or implemented. That became a problem so far because what happened was the diversification of our foreign relations. Maybe because of the changing times and the changing international system that we have, where we see multipolarity and multiplexity. And we've seen the resurgence of China, Russia, and then of course, India, and of course the BRICS that were mentioned earlier there. And also the Philippines is of course trying to perform well, so, given all the challenges that we have in our macroeconomic performances. But since the time of Gloria Arroyo to definitely to Estrada, and then of course we've seen that through Aquino and of course the current administration of Duterte, there is a projection in our macroeconomics. And we've seen that if we continuously inculcate inclusive growth amongst Filipinos, then perhaps we can achieve that upper level, upper middle class economy. Because of course the projection prior to the COVID-19 is that we will exit from becoming a lower income economy. But now we are in the exit strategy and in the post-pandemic now, hopefully, then at least the Philippines can regain that, particularly on its Build project. And of course, although there were only few that were realized, but basically as me, also a reviewer for the DNR, for the environment compliance certificate, I've been reviewing big projects so far, and some of those were financed by Chinese investments. I know for a fact that we are having the Subic Clark Railway, and then of course you also have the bridges in Samuel Davao, and then of course the one in Bacolod, Guimaras, and Iloilo. And of course, we've seen a lot of those projects that perhaps would help us in linkaging major roads and of course this archipelagic country that we have in the Philippines. Now, what are the reasons and the gains so far that we could get from these yes.
Dr. Cabalza, your PowerPoint presentation, can we move where you
Ah,
are now? Yeah,
I don't know.
sorry to interrupt
Yes,
you.
yes.
Yes.
Can you see it now? Okay. I've discussed already this one, the diversification of our foreign relations, and then I'm now on my sixth PowerPoint, where I'll be talking about the gains that the Philippines received so far with the challenges that we had with our relations with China. And it so happened that because of our major, um, how would I say it, brotherly friction with Beijing, we also gained some traction by which Manila became an emerging middle power. And we know for a fact that geopolitics would say and dictate that, of course, the Philippines, given its strategic location, um, there was a proposition for that free and Indo-Pacific region in which it became controversial or also for some other major powers like Russia. And they're trying to digest it, and they cannot fathom that it is indeed a region for other counterparts like India and the US and middle powers like Japan and Australia. Because for Russians, they think that it's just a concept, it's a construct for them, but not as a geopolitical region per se. But of course, it depends. You have the Eurasian power of China, India there, but we are seeing right now the Asian century in this current century, the shift from the west to the east. And we see that most of those big markets in the future will be coming from Asia. But again, that's a reason why the US is trying to reposition again its its focus on the Indo-Pacific, in which they call it formerly the Asia-Pacific for some. And that's the reason why, because of some of the domestic issues that we have in the United States also, and some of the declining factors on American power, they are trying to refocus on their protectionist policies and domestic issues. That's why they just focus on the Indo-Pacific, and now they are forgetting their policeman status in the world. And of course, we know for a reason that you have the Russia-Ukraine war at the moment. And of course, they left Kabul in Afghanistan after 20 years after the 9/11 invasion in Afghanistan, and their intervention in Pakistan and also in Persia, in Iran. So you have all this. But nonetheless, and even after the Americans left Subic and Clark, the Philippines emerged still to become a survivor, and we were able to craft our own policies. And even if we had some modernization issue problems, and now we are trying to rectify it because of the revitalized modernization program that we have, which will end by 2028. Still, there are and of course, because of the challenges, strategic challenges posed by Beijing, that's the reason why we try to cope up with these challenges. But I was like telling that our relations with China is very multidimensional. And in terms of our economic, diplomatic, and cultural relations with them, we are okay. It's fine, basically. But it's just so happened that in terms of the military, strategic, and political, there's a little bit some issues that needs to be rectified, basically. And I think those can still be fixed by the next president. And how do we relate with our bilateral relations with Beijing so far? Economically, of course, there is a projection, as I told you earlier, on how the Philippines would become the 18th biggest economy or the 14th and so on. For our projections, diplomatically, we also have, how would I say it? We are a co-founder of the UN, one of the co-founders of ASEAN, and members of many multilateral and multilateral organizations in the world. And we have the ADB ERI here, and we endow the Ramon Magsaysay Awards. So those are some of the things that we could showcase on the on the reason why the Philippines is emerging middle power right now. Okay, now this one, I hope that you could see it, are some of the challenges when we talk about our relations with China. And definitely, given that the Philippines is and the US has are treaty allies, but we were challenging the US to at least to enlighten us with definitely with while we were challenging some of the military treaties that we have with them, particularly on the Mutual Defense Treaty, the Peacekeeping Forces Agreement, and the EDCA, Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement, because of course we are also thinking of our national interests, particularly with their unfulfilled promises that in case there would be some shooting wars, they would be helping us. But we have not experienced that kind of help from them in some of the many instances that we have had in the past so far. But again, and knowing that the US employs their own instrument of power when they have the diplomatic, economic, strategic, and informational strategies. Of course, our neighbor China is also having its own grand strategy by increasing its economic power and military command to basically balance this US-led dominance in the Indo-Pacific region. And we know for a fact that given the current Russia-Ukraine conflict, depending on whose side we are listening, others would claim it war. Of course, we know the closeness of Moscow and Beijing, basically. But beyond that, Southeast Asia is like the battleground of this power hegemony that we've seen in the past. And Asia, particularly Southeast Asia, is becoming Europe right now, where we see a battlefield for this hegemonic rivalry. And it's okay to have this hegemonic rivalry as long as the Philippines should know its own interests, and this will redound to the interests of the Philippines. That's why we emerge as a middle power, because we can attract major powers, particularly superpowers like the US and China. And that is something that we have to review and perhaps understand in the succeeding years, that having the new president will help us on how to diversify our relations, because we should stop becoming a faithful wife to the United States because of the unbroken promises that they have done in the past to us. We have learned that there are other ways on how to engage with major powers. You have Russia, India, China there to support us in some of our needs, basically. And that has been something that I've been trying to impart to our military students here, that diversification is the way. And it also brings forth that ASEAN's dual strategy to preserve its centrality, of course. That has been a problem in Southeast Asia, basically, because we know for a fact that it becomes a battleground for this hegemonic rivalry, power competition. Although the US is trying to lead that Quad and the AUKUS, but still, where is the Philippines there? Although Quad and AUKUS is being supported by the Philippines, but it has to review its engagements with these powers. What can we gain from them? But ultimately, what can we also gain from China? So I know that we're being pragmatic and practical on how we engage, but that's how neorealism, pragmatism should work. In Germany, they call it realpolitik. So the next president should become more of a neorealist realpolitik on her engagements with these major powers, because we are living in a multipolar and multiplex world. And lastly, for my points here, for us to gain independent foreign policy, and hopefully the next president should exercise it properly, because we have seen that for the past 6 years, we have unclear independent foreign policy, which was stipulated in our supreme law, that is the Constitution. And we tried to befriend and pivot to China, basically. And basically, they're trying to weigh it objectively. There are gains and challenges with that. And I think the best way to continue on and have a better understanding with China is to have a people-people engagement. That's the reason why we have to institutionalize it, have more diplomatic approachments with them, particularly on the scholarships that we are bringing in and bringing out so far. We should be accepting more Chinese military students at our military establishments for us to have a better understanding with them, and vis-a-vis our Filipino soldiers, scholars should also be studying in China to have a better understanding and get rid of all the confusions and biases so far. And definitely there should be joint scientific explorations and scientific cultural activities for both. And of course, if we could also do some enhancement in our tourism. And economic sanctions is just another form of warfare. If we keep on doing that, we're just pushing each other to the wall, just like what the West and the US is doing right now with Russia. Russia is the most sanctioned country on earth, but this is still surviving. And if that happens, if you try to do that, then where is peace and amity? The constructivists would always say, and the liberalists would always say that there should be world peace, understanding. But war is inevitable, but it can be stopped if we consider global security, global interest, and our own national interest. So it is through talking, through these people-to-people engagements, and continuous diplomacy where we would achieve better understanding from each other. So I'll end with this presentation and looking forward for your substantive questions later on. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Cabalza, for that equally very enlightening and thought-provoking presentation. So to further discuss the points and ideas and perspective raised and presented by both our resource speakers, let us move to the open forum. And again, ladies and gentlemen, please feel free to write your comments and questions in the Zoom chat box. We will try to accommodate them as much as we can. So I have the first question here. Okay, wait. Oh, okay. Yes, the first question is, how would you assess the independent foreign policy pursued under President Rodrigo Duterte's administration and its significance? In what way do you think it benefited and redefined Philippine-China relations? Any of the two speakers can answer. Each of you will have time to answer the question. Yes, probably we ask Professor Bobby, then Dr. Cabalza.
Well, in the first place, that was part of my presentation. And from how I see it, President Duterte pursued his so-called pivot to China as some kind of a balancing act on the US. And one of the reasons there is that the President Duterte promised to heighten or intensify its build program. And the only country that is has the capability to supply the needed ODA or grants is China. So that was his main objective in opening or entering into a comprehensive strategic partnership with China. However, in the final analysis, I said also that we are still locked in a Cold War alliance with the US. We still have the same old treaties, agreements that we agreed upon since the 1950s. We are still under the pressure of the US, including under President Joe Biden, to cooperate with the US in terms of strengthening the defense alliance, and such defense alliance will have to be strengthened against China. So we are faced with these major challenges, and we have not succeeded really in pursuing an independent foreign policy because of these two of this constant dictation and pressure by the US to subordinate our Philippine foreign policy to the desires and the whims and objectives, geostrategic objectives of our former colonial master. So that's my point.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Professor
Thank you,
Bobby.
Anna.
Dr. Cabalza?
Yes, I think there was intense power play coming from the president, knowing that he was laying his cards. Some would say that he has that strategic ambiguity. Others would claim he doesn't have because of his flip-flopping policy. But at the end of the day, after 6 years of reviewing that independent foreign policy that he was trying to push forward, in a way, definitely he failed with that. But he was trying his best, basically. I think the good thing about this, there was that diversification because of his eagerness to at least reach out with Beijing and Moscow and New Delhi because they are emerging powers. And I think that those are clever strategies coming from him, that it's not only Washington that can provide our military need, and because of the asymmetrical defense relationship that we have with them. And that was a wake-up call also for Washington. They were surprised, wow, how come that the Philippines, being a middle power, is becoming stubborn? We used to be so faithful with them, trying to loyal and treaty ally with them. But all of a sudden, we're not following their steps and perhaps trying to risk some of our engagements. And that became a turnaround for the Americans, basically, that the Philippines is serious, basically, in its diversification tactics or strategy, basically. And I think it worked for this administration, surprisingly. And that kind of behavior is very risky, although he can be judged differently by historians and some other analysts because of his changing decisions. But nonetheless, the world is changing also. In a way, he was adapting to the security landscape of the world, to global security landscape. And I think it was a reaction to that kind of the changes that we've seen. Although there were pronouncements and statements coming from him that can be questioned, basically, particularly on the level of the national interest of the Philippines. But he opened a lot of Pandora's box for us, particularly for the next president on how he or she will lead this country, particularly in crafting the foreign policy of the Philippines.
Yeah. Thank you, Professor Bobby, and also Dr. Cabalza for answering that question. You've mentioned about, there's this discussion that Dr. Cabalza actually mentioned about the diversification, no? Not necessarily in terms of military alliance, but in military cooperation. Do you think diversification of military cooperation with other countries, like, for example, the ASEAN member states, with ASEAN member states, Russia, China, other than the United States, is something that the next administration should pursue? Do you think it will be to the advantage of the Philippines in with this kind of diversification that already have started in this current administration? What do you think? Yes,
Yeah, may I?
Professor. Yes, sir.
If we really want to pursue an independent foreign policy, let's get rid of military alliances. We should not fall into the trap again of being a subordinate member in a defense alliance, bilateral defense alliance with the US. It will drag us into war, like what is happening now in the light of the Ukraine crisis. I think somebody from the government said, let us support the US and send troops to Ukraine to fight the Russians. So we'll be part of the Cold War II, not Cold War II. Um, there should be a strong political will to make our country independent. And the first thing to do is to shape up our own economy. Because only if we have a strong, stable economy can we have an independent foreign policy without being dictated and kicked around by the US. Now, how to do that and how the next administration will be able to address this monumental need to strengthen our economic capability. That, of course, if the next administration will agree on to that, then it will then have to also adopt a monumental strategy. And that, I think, is where we need a diversification of economic partnerships. Not only with China, we can also maintain a bilateral economic partnership with the US. Of course, let us support the ASEAN initiative on in developing a stable economic community like the EU. So things like that, we should concentrate more on diversifying our economic partnerships with the rest of the world, even with Africa, even with the Middle East, even with Latin America. It's about time that we pursue that kind of diplomacy, economic diplomacy.
Thank you, Professor Bobby. Dr. Cabalza?
Yeah, thank you for that beautiful question. I have a contrasting perspective towards that. And of course, trying to become relevant because of the Russia-Ukraine war conflict that we have here. Of course, the concept in the past is the Finlandization, where of course it's a Cold War concept, and basically because Helsinki ceded some of its territory because it lost war with Moscow. But basically, there was war. But if we try to I have a proposition that, of course, with the book that we wrote basically lately on the Philippinization, it's a different perspective in terms of its texture on foreign policy and national security, where while we are being we get attractions from big powers like the US and China, at the same time we are doing some infrastructure works when it comes to our economic and national security. Meaning to say that while we get gains from these two powers, at the same time we are doing our best also to elevate our economy and to strengthen our national security infrastructures. So the point that I'm trying to drive at here is that we are not, we don't subdue to these superpowers, but at the same time we get gains from them and we try to level up and at least have an equal footing with them, in a way to have that respectable defense posture, so that we have an equal and symmetrical relationship with them. Because what we experienced in the past are the injustices and the asymmetrical relationship with these major powers. That we have seen that if a nation is at least prosperous and stronger, then these great powers can at least respect you, just like what we've seen with Indonesia and Vietnam. They tried to strengthen their economies and at the same time their national security infrastructures. And China and the US didn't even touch them because of this matter. Now, that is also the point that we're trying to see in the Russia-Ukraine, where of course Ukraine should do the same thing on Philippinization there, where while having this conflict with Russia, it has to alleviate itself and of course repair some of its damages in terms of the national security infrastructures that they have. So again, for the next administration, it has to be pragmatic on its diversification relations with major powers. What can we gain from this major power A, major power B, major power C, and so on? And then put it in such a way that this can help our country and would benefit and redound to the interest of the country.
Okay. Before I move on to the next question, let me just have a follow-up question for Dr. Cabalza. Given what you're explaining and what you call Philippinization, no? Would it mean as well that we should not do away with the Mutual Defense Treaty, but rather have a review of it and make it more symmetrical, something like that? That's
Right.
what you're trying to say?
You know, the Philippines-US relations will remain, whether we like it or not. And even if we will have a president that we like it or not, because definitely the US will try its best to continue with our bilateral relations with them, given the strategic location of the Philippines and its strategic value for them, knowing that, of course, we have also Filipino communities in the United States. And of course, because of the democratic values that we share together. But you know, the treaty allies that we have with the US, from Mutual Defense Treaty to BFA and EDCA, are a one of a kind of in the world, basically, that made it lasting. It is one of the longest treaty allies in Asia and the world that we've seen so far. That despite all the differences and asymmetrical and discriminatory partnerships that we have had with the United States, we are still clinging with the US. You see the love-hate relationship that we have with Washington. And that is something that we have to look at. At least now, we have ignited something from Washington that we wish to review it. We're not trying to abrogate it. And that happened with the direction of the current administration. They really wanted to abrogate it twice, but it did not succeed. But they know the significance of this relationship. So the point of what I'm trying to drive at here is that there is a need to review, because some of the provisions of those defense treaties that we have had with the US are obsolete. And we are now in the changing times. Maybe in the succeeding decades, the US will no longer be the superpower. Or maybe in the next century, there are other superpowers, economic superpowers. Definitely, we've seen by projection that China and India will become the economic superpowers, no longer the United States. Then, if we continue with this kind of treaty and asymmetrical relationship with Washington, it's a lose situation for the Philippines. We have to be more pragmatic. We review it, and then there should be some conditions there in terms of the implementation, because it's very dangerous that it says there in the provisions that in case of shooting wars, Washington would help us. Although as of the moment, based from a military assessment, we could see and sense that the US Navy is still the supreme Navy in the world. They have World War experiences, unlike China, that doesn't have yet. And although China have more military assets in terms of the quantitative measurement, but still the US and the West are at their prime, at their peak when it comes to their military capability. So these are some of the realities that we have to consider. And if our next president is more pragmatic and have consciousness on national security, then he or she would know that there is a need to review the defense and military treaties that we have with the United States.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Cabalza. Sir Bobby, do you have comment, or we'll proceed to the next question?
Well, I will just share a short comment. It is really unfortunate that until now we haven't extracted ourselves from the shadow of the United States in the light of the strategic location of the Philippines. If you remember, in our Philippine colonial history with the U.S., one of the major reasons why the U.S. invaded the Philippines was because they wanted to use the Philippines as a springboard for expanding their capitalist market investment in the whole of Asia, particularly in China. So we share a common history, by the way, with China because of this historical background. So until the US is finally removed from projecting its unwelcome power in Asia, in Southeast Asia, for which we have to work for that, then we are really left in an indefinite predicament on how to face up with this particular challenge that has actually impacted our own development and has led us to a situation, I think, during the 1950s, 1960s, when the Philippines was called the puppet government of the US. We need to earn the respect of the world. And the only way to earn that is to become independent economically, unchain our military alliance with the US, which has nothing to do with in promoting our own future as a nation. So we need really some kind of a political and economic struggle here vis-a-vis the US.
Yes. Thank you, Professor Bobby and Dr. Cabalza. Now let's move on to the second question, which is a little bit, this will be also a very hot question, I think. No, but this is all about the differences that we have with China on the South China Sea. So the question is, how can the Philippines and China concretely resolve their conflict of interest and differences in the disputed South China Sea? And what's the way forward or best possible scenario for both countries to overcome such differences and the competing claims over the disputed West Philippine Sea? So it's much more, I think, what would be the steps, especially of the next administration, since the administration of President Duterte is almost over, no? Of three months to go. I think that's not much significant when you talk about these issues. So yeah, that's much more the question. It's much more prescription, how we gonna address to a greater extent our differences in the South China Sea, which is it's actually a small part of our overall bilateral relation with China, but still it's a very important issue, that we need to pay attention to. So
Okay,
yes,
may I, Anna?
yes, sir.
Yeah, if you remember quite well, we agreed to reach an agreement with China with regard to the establishment of a bilateral mechanism for dialogue, through which we can use to resolve our differences, including primarily our differences with China with regard to the South China Sea. Well, I have heard reports that it has not been optimized because of the quite unbelievable reason that because of that has been discontinued because of the pandemic crisis, which to me is quite unacceptable. So let us ask the government, let us ask the DFA, let us ask especially the military to optimize the use of such bilateral mechanisms. I think there's always a way by which such bilateral mechanisms can be used. You know, the UNCLOS, the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, even provides for if you cannot settle your differences before the court, it advises strongly that you use peaceful negotiation. And I think if we can optimize that, we might somehow find a way. Sorry, quite an interruption. Sorry for that. Yeah, well, I missed some points. That's all I can say about this question, Anna.
Thank you. Opo. Thank you, Professor Bobby. Yes, Dr. Cabalza.
Yes, Professor Anna. There was one instance where we tried to lobby our differences at the ASEAN, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, and we know for the reality that as mentioned earlier in the discussions in the presentation, that Southeast Asia is like a battleground for this power competition, that for the hegemonic rivalry, which is of course understandable because of the strategic location of Southeast Asia and many of the middle powers in Southeast Asia, including the Philippines. But ASEAN has its own limitations because of its village-like customs of consensus, and definitely it didn't work basically. That's the reason why we try to internationalize the issue on the West Philippine Sea. But the more we have internationalized it, the more our giant neighbor became aggressive because of, perhaps we could call it, the lack of communication of these two. There were provocations and so on, incursions and so on. But at the end of the day, we've learned from our lessons. And just like what Vietnam has been doing, they try to engage with China, continuously engage with China. And maybe China should also be engaging with middle powers like the Philippines there, because you have many mechanisms of doing it, bilaterally, unilaterally, multilaterally, no? Those kinds of isms there. But at the end of the day, it all boils down to a better understanding on each other. What do we really want? And personally, of course, you have that people-to-people engagement, and of course, if the president would consider diversification strategy in its defense and foreign relations, then definitely it's not only Beijing that we will turn into in terms of our bilateral relationship or foreign relations, but also to all of the major powers, because these major powers have a stake in the South China Sea. U.S. would always claim for a free and open Indo-Pacific, in which case they will pass by through the South China Sea, West Philippine Sea. And of course, China would also assume that the FONOPS, the freedom of navigation and overflight. And everyone is talking about these major powers because the Southeast Asia, the South China Sea is a sea lanes of communications, a major. And we've seen the traffic economically in that channel, in that sea lanes. And of course, right now with the Russia-Ukraine war, there was the father of geopolitics was telling that if you succeed in containing the Eurasian, then you become the superpower. And now that's the land power, and the sea power now is in South China Sea. That if you conquer, or if you dominate, or if you lead the South China Sea, you become the superpower. That's why you see power competition. And it's very dynamic, basically, on how these engagements and relationships are changing. We know for a fact that Japan used to be the foremost enemies of the US, and so with the Philippines, but it became very good friends. They became very good friends. In other words, China is not can still be the friends of the Philippines in the future. Even they are still friends, but definitely with all the differences that we have in the South China Sea, West Philippine Sea, we need to say that it can be resolved. Now, thing is the code of conduct. Whether or not we like it, the code of conduct will happen once we will have the new president, because in the timeline that is predicted to happen. And of course, all of the stakeholders, whether big or small countries, should have an equal footing in that code of conduct, because they are recipients and beneficiaries of those islands, contested islands. And China should also recognize that if they want to gain respect regionally and from their small neighbors. And once China will do that, definitely small countries like the Philippines and others would be happy about that. At this peace, which has become elusive for the past years, can be reachable the soonest. once this can be implemented.
Okay.
Can I add something, Anna?
Yes, Professor Bobby.
If I may. I
Go on.
think what we need here is a deeper understanding of China. There's one historical lesson that we can glean from the way China was able to settle its territorial disputes with neighboring countries. Now, since 1949, China has had about 24 territorial disputes with neighboring countries. And more than 50% or 17 of these disputes have been resolved. The approach that was used by China and those countries with which China is involved in this territorial dispute is through peaceful negotiation. In fact, in many cases, China even bent backward by as much as 60% of its territorial claim. The critical point by which those agreements were signed, was the signing of non-aggression treaty with those countries. In short, from hence on, peaceful relations would be pursued between China and those countries with which China had territorial disputes. That's why I was recommending earlier that we must optimize the bilateral mechanisms or dialogue mechanisms in resolving our disputes with China. And the DFA should listen, should be the first to do that. And the military should listen, give way to the diplomatic track, because that's the only way by which a peaceful solution to the South China Sea can be pursued. If not now, if not in the next administration, but let's keep on talking. Now let's open the dialogue with China.
Okay, thank you, Professor Bobby. So it seems from both our speakers, what we can surmise is still the peaceful and diplomatic solution to our differences with China in the disputed South China Sea. So I have my last question here. Then we move on to the next part of our program. So the last question is, since we're talking about Philippine-China relation, what do you think are what still are the possible areas of cooperation and coordination for both countries to focus on and pay attention to, so that the existing friendship and cooperation that we have with China can be deepened more, and then it's in a way it resolves and it will result to a positive, more positive relation with our neighbor, which is a giant neighbor out there, no? So yes, I'll go first with Dr. Cabalza, then Professor Bobby.
Thank you for the last question, and it's very interesting to talk about the recommendations on how we foster our understanding and relationship with China. I think we have the oldest Chinatown in the world, as they would claim in Binondo, and it should have been perfected in terms of our assimilation process with our Filipino Chinese friends and families here, and definitely China should be more empathetic and understanding, given that of course we are a lot of Filipino Chinese, and this way of course our relations has been very deep since prehistorical times. I mean, since pre-colonial times, and the Chinese people have been there all throughout our history in helping us in our economics, trade, and politics. And these issues on and the skirmishes on the West Philippine Sea is just one of the dimensions that we really have to perfect and consider also. I know that this kind of relationship will evolve, and hopefully we will patch up things and we will find better solutions. It just complicated things because of our treaty allies and some of our treaty obligations that we've signed historically with our friends in the past, and they were our colonizer friends, and of course the deepening relationship that we have because we have also Filipino communities in the States. So the dilemma there is within the Philippines and in the Philippines. How do we deal with these two brothers, big brothers, basically? Because if you try to look at it, we have affinities and definitely connections with these both countries, and they are aspiring superpowers. That's why we are in a bit sandwiched by their competing ambitions. And we also have an ambition and aspiration. So I think the solution there is to have open dialogue, continuously engage with them, have people-to-people engagements. If we were able to have open and very fluid relationship with Washington, why not have this kind of open relationship with Beijing also? And secondly, economically, we know for a fact that there will be changing tides in the trade and commerce and economics. Perhaps we can at least have some benefits with this so-called Asian century, where we will see China becoming the leader economically in the world. Perhaps it would help us in some of the infrastructure programs that we have, because what we need right now are the continuous infrastructure programs and inclusive growth to become an upper middle class economy and to have large middle class Filipino citizens. And we need a lot of education and understanding towards our neighbor. It's like retracing our heritage, our Asian heritage, because of the Chinese resurgence right now. And through understanding, hopefully Beijing will also understand our side, and Manila should also understand mainlanders and some of their geopolitical situation there. So I'll end it that way. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Cabalza. Sir Bobby, yes, before we move on to the next part of our program.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Anna.
Welcome.
I think we should have experienced and competent diplomats who will take charge of handling our foreign relations with China. You know, China has a broad treasure of competent diplomats, like Wang Yi, the foreign minister and state councilor Wang Yi. Then there is Jiang Jieche, I pronounced the name correctly. So if we are to talk to the Chinese and expect the Chinese to listen to us, we should organize competent diplomats to face up with China. I don't remember who would possibly be the exemplary model of what we are looking for. Probably CPR, Carlos P. Romulo, although Carlos P. Romulo was identified with the Americans. Maybe the likes of S.P. Lopez, the great Salvador P. Lopez, who also served as foreign secretary and also served as UP president. Now, these are the people that we are in dire need of today. I'm not saying any names, but I don't necessarily endorse the people who are now leading the DFA. In many respects, I disagree with how they handle relations with China, even using their Twitter to malign China. And if we have those people, then by all means, let us all agree to continue the talks. You know, China is noted for its walk the talk principle. Walk the talk principle, meaning to say what it says, what it says it means, and what it says it will do. They're known for that. So if we are ready to talk and we have the competent people to do that, of course, Chito Santaromano is a good diplomat over there in Beijing. I know him as a friend. Let us optimize, as I said, these bilateral talks with China. and we might be able to gain the respect of China. We have really prepared, and we pose to them our own criteria and approaches in settling whatever differences we have with China. You know, China is very much concerned about the South China Sea for one historical reason: the century accumulation. For China, or rather the South China Sea, was used as the springboard of many colonial powers, including Japan and the US, to dismember China way back in 1949 to 1940, 1849 to 1949 into extraterritorial spheres of influence at the expense of the Chinese people and at the expense of China's growth that was known to be the center of the world back then until the mid 19th century. That is why it is very much concerned about this South China Sea as the potential route for modern day invasion and encirclement of China led by the United States.
Thank you, Sir Bobby. Okay, thank you, Professor Bobby. Thank you, Dr. Cabalza, for answering our questions and for being patient, and answering sufficient question posed to both of you. Before we proceed to the closing remarks, let me just make an announcement. The next APCO forum with the theme Enhancing Understanding and Cooperation between China and ASEAN countries under RCEP, Gains, Potential, and Challenges will be on April 21. That's a Thursday at just 3 p.m. Our main speakers are Attorney Alan Jepti, Assistant Secretary, Industry Development and Trade Policy Group of the Department of Trade and Industry, and the second main speaker is Dr. Teresa Chong Carino, Senior Research Consultant of the Amity Foundation. We also have a reactor in that forum, and that's Dr. Henry Lim Bonyong, FFCCCII President, Business and Civic Leader, CEO of Sterling Paper Group, and founder of SL Agritech. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your attention. For the last part of our program, let me call on the President of Apcu, Mr. Jeffrey Nang, for the closing remarks. Sir Jeffrey, you have the floor po.
Thank you, Anna.
Thank you, sir.
Vice Chairman Sixto Benedicto, fellow trustees, officers, and members of Apcu, to our distinguished resource speakers, Professor Bobby Tuazon and Dr. Chester Cabalza, media partners, friends, and colleagues, a pleasant afternoon to all. The rapprochement policy of President Duterte, which pertains to the re-establishment of cordial and friendly relations towards China, is one of the legacies of his administration. In concrete terms, the Philippines has forged deeper friendly and cooperative relations with China on issues and matters where there existed mutual understanding in areas where the two countries have no disputes or differences, such as economics and trade, science and technology, cultural exchanges, and people-to-people relations. At the same time, it tries to resolve its differences and conflict of interests with China, more specifically in the South China Sea, through diplomatic and peaceful means within the ambit of ASEAN. President Duterte himself said that the West Philippine Sea issue, which is the center spot of the differences between the Philippines and China, is another matter separate from the friendship of the two countries. Certainly, Philippines-China bilateral relations have improved under President Duterte's administration and have been upgraded to comprehensive strategic cooperation. The Philippines has also benefited economically from the warming relationship with China, which is quite crucial as the country aims to bounce back from the economic devastation and recession caused by the COVID-19 pandemic. To date, China remains the largest trading partner of the Philippines, It is now the country's #1 trading partner, #1 import source, #2 export market, a major foreign investor, and the second largest source of tourists for the Philippines. Likewise, China, in support of the Duterte administration's flagship Build, Build, Build program, has donated 2 bridges. The Estrella Pantaleon Bridge, which was completed in June 2021, and the Binondo Intramuros Bridge, which is expected to be completed next month. Indeed, the friendly and deepening ties between the Philippines and China, despite existing differences, have yielded tangible and concrete benefits for both countries and their peoples. Hence, Philippines-China bilateral relations have not only gained some new vitality under the new Duterte administration, but have yielded fruits and tangible benefits for the country and its people, ushering in a renaissance of Philippines-China relations. On this note, I hope that we Filipinos will focus more on the positive aspects of that bilateral relation, which bring tangible economic benefits to the country, while actively resolving our differences with China over the disputed waters of the South China Sea through peaceful means and diplomacy at all levels possible. Take note that the country's difference with China over the South China Sea is just a tiny part of the country's bilateral relations with China. On this note, on behalf of Apcu, I would like to congratulate and extend my sincere gratitude to our resource speakers for sharing their ideas, knowledge, and experience about the topic. Let me express as well my gratitude to all of you who have joined and participated in today's Apcu Forum. Most definitely, your presence and active participation have made this forum a fruitful and productive endeavor. See you all in the next Apcu Forum next month. Again, thank you and have a wonderful day, everyone.
Thank you, Apcu President, Mr. Jeffrey Nang, for the closing remarks. Ladies and gentlemen, friends and colleagues, our forum has come to an end. On behalf of Apcu, I would like to thank you for your participation. I would like also to express our heartfelt thanks and sincere thanks to our esteemed resource speakers, Professor Bobby Tuazon and Dr. Chester Cabalza, for sharing your knowledge, ideas, and experience on the topic. It was really a learning experience for all of us. We hope that we all learned something from our excellent resource speakers. We will see you all soon at our next Apcu Forum next month. Have a pleasant afternoon, everyone. Stay safe and healthy, and thank you very much again for being with us. Thank you, Professor Bobby, and thank you, Dr. Cabalza, really for gracing our Apcu Forum. Maraming salamat po. Sheshe, mabuhay po tayong lahat. Maraming salamat po.
Thank you. Thank you.